Welcome to Aspire, and I Have the Right To podcast, where we amplify voices, share stories, and drive change in the fight against sexual assault. We explore the critical issues surrounding student safety, institutional accountability, and survivor empowerment. In every episode, our goal is to provide insightful conversations with survivors, experts, educators, and advocates, giving you, our listener, valuable information, resources, and actionable steps to create safer environments and cultivate a culture of respect and consent. Today, we're so excited to welcome someone whose voice has been a constant guide in my own parenting journey. I followed Dr. Mona for years on social media, and like so many others, I found her advice both grounding and empowering. She's a board-certified pediatrician, a certified lactation consultant, and the founder of Peds Doc Talk, a platform followed by hundreds of thousands of families around the world. Through her clinical work and her online presence, Dr. Mona shares science-based, compassionate guidance on everything from toddler tantrums to raising emotionally healthy and confident kids.
At I Have the Right To, we say that prevention doesn't start in high school. It starts much earlier with the everyday conversations we have with young kids about their bodies, their feelings, and their boundaries. Dr. Mona's work supports that mission. One of the things we love about her approach is that she brings both professional expertise and lived experience. She's known for saying, "I don't just speak textbook, I speak textbook and mom." And that's exactly what makes her so trusted and relatable.
Dr. Mona, we're so grateful to have you here. Welcome to Aspire.
Thank you for having me. Thanks for that intro. The feeling is mutual on your mission, my mission on my platform, to really, again, raise emotionally insightful, healthy children. And I think we tend to focus on health as just physical health, but so much of it is mental health and emotional intelligence and knowing boundaries, and all of that comes with that. So thank you. This is such an important conversation.
Yeah, we're so excited to have you here with us. So let's jump in and start with the basics. Why is it so important to teach kids about body safety from a young age?
For so many reasons. And I think one of the biggest one is for safety, for their future, and also just safety in their young years, right? And this can show up in very small ways early on, and then obviously it expands as the child gets older. So in the infancy period, and I think parents, when they listen to this, may be like, well, I don't have time for this, but I'm going to give very practical solutions and practical things that you can do. Narrating what you're doing when you're doing a diaper change, right? You don't have to ask an infant for permission to change their diaper, because that's not always going to be possible for an infant, but just narrate, mommy's changing your diaper, we're scrubbing, so they understand that this is something that's a private area, that's their own area, but that, yeah, we have to clean the diaper. And then as we get into those other years, right, you are going to start to really incorporate that awareness and knowledge of body and privacy, and allowing the child to understand what it is and who it is allowed to be in that area. And that also can help them in the future to understand when things are not okay, right? So our goal is to create this foundation, the layer of safety, the layer of communication and connection from a safe caregiver that says this is what's normal, so that when they know what's not normal, when they know what's not feeling good, they can fight for that and say, this isn't what's supposed to happen. My mommy or daddy or caregiver said that that's not normal, so that they can really get the help and feel confident knowing that this is what I'm supposed to do.
That's really amazing to hear, especially since, a lot of the times parents can be so reluctant to talk or even bring up the word consent because of its connotations as something that has to be sexual. But we know that consent is not just about sex. It's about communication, respect, and agency. So how early would you say that kids can start learning about body boundaries, and how should those conversations sound? How should parents, or even, I'm an older sister to an 8-year younger sister. And so it was really cool to get to experience these conversations firsthand and actually have memories of them. But how do you think those conversations should sound and start?
Yeah, I love this. And I think, we talked about the infancy period, how it's more narration. And then when we get into those toddler years, when they start to refuse a hug or a kiss or refuse something from you, even as a caregiver, you don't force that. right? I mean, I know sometimes you're like, give mommy a kissy. I give the example of my 2-year-old daughter. Someday she doesn't want to give mommy a kissy. And I said, okay, maybe later you'll give mommy a kissy. And of course, she's going to give mommy a kissy when she feels like it. And as parents, sometimes we think that, well, it's my kid. I can do what I want. It's, it's loving. It's not, there's nothing more than just it being love. But by doing so, I'm teaching my children, like I think more parents can do, that they have a say in their, the things that are okay and not basically that are negotiable, right? There are non-negotiable things in our household, right? Like, for example, changing diapers, giving a bath, like these things have to happen. And I think in your head, you have to think about, okay, what are the non-negotiable boundaries? Like if I have to help them with their brushing of the teeth, right? We could say that, well, that's actually invading their space. But if it has to do with hygiene, and if it has to do obviously with their safety, that is when we can say, hey, I'm doing this because we got to brush our teeth. I'm doing this because we got to clean your body, right? So just again, going back to that foundation of narration. And I think that's so key. So to answer your question, the toddler years, right? Respecting no when it's safe to do so, offering choice. Do you want to wipe your nose or should I? Right? Like small little things that we can change to give them some control over their body when we're doing all of these things. And then the other big thing that I know I'm not the only one who talks about this is tickling. I think tickling is such an awesome parent-child connection thing, but tickling is one of those examples that it can feel fun and good until it doesn't. And to use that example of in a sexual experience, and I think it's fair to say this, sometimes things can feel good until it doesn't, right? So with something like tickling, I know people have a hard time hearing that, but it's important to remember that if you have like some sort of out for that child. Like, hey, I'm tickling you. If you don't like it, tell mommy and I'll stop. And my son will say, no, mommy, I'm all done. Or my daughter will say that because we do tickle, but we also respect when it's over. And then as your child gets older into those preschool years, if they want to use the bathroom privately and you have to help make sure that they wiped, you do it first. And just to make sure that you're safe and fully clean, I will check right after. If they have that sort of desire to cover themselves up during or after a bath, asking questions about their bodies, I think is all really important. And then we also know that how we communicate body autonomy and safety around others. So grandma wants a kiss. Do you want to give a kiss? Do you want to give a high five or nothing? You don't have to do that. There's no pressure to give the kiss. There's no pressure to give the hug, right? And I think that it starts with home in terms of being able to create that safe foundation that I am your safe space. I'm not going to force you to do any of that with me. I'm also not going to force you to do it with anyone external from our home. And then it comes down to when they are out there with people that you love, if they're not feeling like they want to give that adult a hug, we're not pressuring that. We're saying, hey, right now, he doesn't want to give a hug, but maybe he wants to give a fist bump. Maybe he wants to give a high five. And if they refuse that, they'll come around when they're ready. And I think there's such a cultural sort of feeling of disrespect when a kid doesn't give a hug or a kid doesn't physically show affection. But we have to understand that that leads them down the line of my value and my adults in my life are giving me attention and care for me when I show that physical affection. Or the worst thing I see is when they don't give the hug and then grandma goes, you didn't give me a hug. That makes me so sad. We just taught that child that because I didn't give them physical touch, that now I hurt their feelings. And that doesn't give a good sense of this is my body. I have control over it. And then the future thing, which we'll talk about, is then how do we respect other people's bodies, right? Like we're talking about ourselves, but that is all part of this foundation of then I don't want us to get into other people's private space or other people's physical space if that's not what they want. And I have so many examples in my own 2 children because one's very touchy-feely and one is get off of me. And I think it's so interesting when I watch this, like how that unfolds, because I'm really trying to teach both of them about body autonomy with 2 different types of love languages too.
I feel that completely. I have so many conversations with my kids about this, and we have to model it at home because if they're not confident giving the people they are closest to a no, they're not going to be confident doing it outside of the home. And just, teaching them, siblings are sort of the best place to learn a lot of things, right? Like teaching them, okay, my no matters. And so my brother has to listen to me when I say no, but when my brother says no, I also have to listen to them. And it's interesting how you said sort of if grandma or whoever says, oh, but you're not going to hug me, I feel bad. I had that same example happen with my kid's grandfather, who is the sweetest pappy in the world and loves my kids. And he knows, if they say no, you don't get the hug, right? So then he says, oh, I'm just joking. And I said to him, how would you feel if in the future she tells somebody no and then they try to guilt her or him, right? Like, you don't want that to be something that they think is normal or okay. And a lot of times if you talk about it with the older adults, a lot of times they get it. And if not, I say, that's their own thing to work out. It's not my kid's job to work it out for them. But it definitely is interesting navigating it for sure. So one thing that I've seen, so my son is 8 and my daughter is 4. And when I go into the pediatrician's office, I always try to make sure my kids are really empowered. Like when the doctor says, what's going on? Why don't you feel good? I have my kids answer, so that they're feeling like empowered during the whole thing. And one thing that I have found interesting is that with my son, there wasn't as much communication with him when he was younger, whereas now I'm seeing it more and more. Like they ask permission before they look at them, they talk directly to them. And so I just wanted to chat with you about, what do you think are some things that pediatricians can do, or healthcare professionals in general, to sort of reinforce this bodily autonomy in the medical practice?
I love this. And I think it absolutely starts with the language that we use at the visit when we do have to check the private areas, right? So your penis and vagina area. And that comes down to communication with the parent as well. So when and I'm going to share what I do, which really does work. And so when I do my visit, I'm obviously not going directly down to that area. And I really am checking. I think one of the biggest things for listeners to understand, because I get a lot of, why does the doctor even need to check that? Right? Like there's no need. And from a medical standpoint, I want to be clear that what we're looking for in girls, I think this is important information, is we're looking for any labial adhesions, anatomical concerns that sometimes when they get older, they may not want to share with mom and dad or caregiver. We're also looking for any signs of early puberty, which again, when kids become more private, maybe around the age of 7, 8, they may not share with mom or dad. And so it's really important for us to just make sure we're looking at those signs of testicular size, pubic hair, for boys, and then girls were looking for pubic hair for signs of puberty. And then of course for girls and boys looking for breast buds to show if they're going through early puberty. So put that off the bat, is that is why we are checking that, right? So know the intent is from making sure that the kids are developing normally and nothing more than that. And then it comes down to how I speak to the child. And I do this from a very young age, like for the younger kids that are under 3, I'm narrating, okay, I'm checking your diaper. Time to check your diaper. Let's see your penis. I'm using anatomical names. I think it's really important that parents hear that the doctor is not using, let's check your tinkle. I'm checking your penis. I'm checking your vulva. I'm checking your, I'm using that term in front of the family to reinforce that this is the language we use. It's nothing to be ashamed of. Our body parts, just like I wouldn't say, let's look at your earsy weirsies. I'm going to say, let's look at your penis. Let's look at your vagina or vulva. And then, so I say that I'm narrating that. And then for the school age child, the child that's over 4, I look at the caregiver and I say, hey, I now have to check his penis area, or I now have to check underneath his underwear. Mommy, are you okay that I check underneath the underwear? Mommy gives me the go ahead. And then I also look at the child and say, hey, sweetie, I have to make sure that everything looks okay. I'm going to take a quick look down there. Are you okay? And they usually say yes because the parent gave the permission, right? And I do that because I'm a stranger to this child, right? If I ask the child first, they're going to look at their parent, right? At that young of an age, they're going to be like, Mom, Dad, is that okay? So I get the parent's permission, who I'm hoping is the person who's been laying the foundation. Once I get the go ahead from them, I still ask for permission from the child. I have had situations where kids are like, no, I don't want to check it, right? And I turn to the parent and I say, look, if you can make sure that you check down there and you can just make sure that, you let me know if there's any concern, I'm not going to pin a child down to check their genitalia. right? Unless it's like a medical concern that there's like a concern of the penis or something like that, then we'll try to do something less scary. But I'm not going to pin a child down. Like, it's not what I want to do. And so then I might say like, hey, can you just make sure you check it later? I'm just going to write that we weren't able to look at this, and that's okay. I'm not going to force anybody to do what they don't want to do. And then for the older adolescents who get, let's say even your pre-adolescent who's very conservative, when they approach that, again, 9 years old of like privacy, I still explain to them, like, I'm just looking to make sure. I ask the parent, but I also make sure that they're okay with it. And that sort of triad of trust really does help. And it's that communication and that language around normal body parts, anatomy, and also what it is that I'm doing, right? I am checking. And then sometimes the kids are very awkward after, like they're like, oh man, why'd you have to check that? Like my older teenagers or something. And I say flat out, I'm like, hey, I'm just making sure that you're growing well, that your testicles look okay, that your penis looks okay, because it can tell me if I need to be concerned about your hormones or anything about how you're growing. And I'm just very transparent. But the approach depends on the age of the child, and how much I can divulge to them. But I think it's such a good place to start there, of having the pediatrician on your team to make sure that they are giving that sort of information to the family and to the child, and fostering that autonomy. So it's not just like, hey, I'm just going to check this and then whoop, their pants are down. Like, that's very awkward for a child, because now they look at you as an authority figure and now you're just taking down their pants. And it's like, what the heck happened? We wouldn't do that to anybody that we wouldn't really know or trust. So even though I'm a doctor, I think I owe it to my patients to get their permission to do so.
100%. And it's so nice as a parent to be in an office where that's what the doctors and the nurses do. And even before we go into the doctor's office, I'll often talk to my child about what to expect and what might happen, and that the doctor might need to look at you, and this is why they do this. And even like you said, like using all the accurate names for body parts, it also just takes that shame out of it, so that it's just something we talk about, just like everything else, so that if something does happen down the line, they're able to have the correct words. They feel empowered to talk about it. They know that even in a doctor's office, they're in charge of their body and they get to give permission. So it's so important. We had a case one time where somebody told a teacher that someone touched them on their belly button because they didn't have the correct words, right? And so the teacher is thinking, okay, it's a little weird for somebody to touch you on your belly button, but they're not taking it that serious. I had a friend who told their child to refer to their penis as a squirrel. And I said to them, don't do that. A parent or an adult is going to think it's a stuffed animal or something. You have to give them the right words and empower them to speak up and talk to them about their body, just like you talk to them about everything else. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. And one thing that I'd like to share is that my husband is very uncomfortable with the way that I speak to our children about body parts. And he's a physician, but it's because he grew up in a family that it wasn't very talked about. They weren't open about the terminology. They weren't open about autonomy. And, my kids will say, Mommy, where are your breasts? Like they'll ask those questions, are those your breasts? Like, I mean, and to my husband hearing a 5-year-old and my 2-year-old say those words. And I'm like, listen, if they're comfortable with me saying those words, exactly what you said, that if anybody touches my son's penis or my daughter, anyone touches my daughter, they will be like, hey, Mom, someone touched my penis, or versus I've heard so many different words, and it's, like tail or willy, all these things. And I'm like, it becomes a cycle that we need to break in parenting of like getting comfortable using the anatomical names, like I said, just as much as we would use anatomical names for any other body part, whether it's behind an underwear or on our face, right? We should be using the anatomical name. And it, like you said, so much safety can happen and trust when we use those words.
Yeah, and giving them that agency in the doctor's office as well, because I always tell my kids, like, you need to be respectful, but if somebody is making you uncomfortable, whether it's a doctor or a coach or a teacher or a police officer, you have the right to tell them no and tell them that you want to talk to your mom and dad. And, because of cases that I've had, right? And so giving them that agency when you can and talking through it so that they understand it is just, it's so important.
And it almost feels like when you introduce alternative names that are kind of silly for anatomical body parts, that you introduce a level or a layer of shame to kids early on. And I think it's amazing what you're doing, sort of destigmatizing these body parts that aren't inherently sexual. We sexualize body parts so quickly, especially for young women, and especially, I developed breasts earlier than a lot of my peers. And so I felt that insecurity, that shame that, oh, you should probably wear a higher neck top now that you've developed breasts. And my question was, why? Why is this something that I should hide? It's my body. And we talk a lot about, especially with our work in schools and, stepping outside of the exam room now, about dress codes. And how one exact outfit in a correct size on one person's body can be seen as inappropriate on another person's body. And so I think, a lot of the people that we work with, a lot of the people that might be listening to this, might not have kids that are going to the pediatrician yet, but might work in schools and in different spaces where they deal with kids on a day-to-day basis. And do you have any advice for people in communities that work with kids and schools, teachers, on how to not put that stigma and shame on children's bodies, especially as they're getting through puberty at a young age?
I think it starts with self, right? And like I said, a lot of it is patterns from their own childhood or their own upbringing. Maybe it was a conservative religious house, or maybe it was not even religious upbringing, but more just the fact that the norms were not to speak about that, right? And so then it comes down to being comfortable with naming your own parts in front of your children, right? And I use the prime example of when you're potty training a child, it should be an open door policy for your child to see, hey, come see mommy pee-pee. It sounds wild for people who aren't used to this, but it is so healthy for them to see that, to hear that. And so it starts with self. How are you speaking about these body parts? How are you bringing shame to the things that go on in your body? How is that done for you? How did people, if you're a woman, how did people talk to you about periods? How did people talk to you about, when you, your example again, when you started getting breast development, what was the narratives that were there for you? And tapping into, how did that make you feel? Did it make you feel more secure in your body, or did it make you feel ashamed in your body? And, a lot of girls and boys, but a lot of girls go through body image issues. And a lot of it is because of this taboo discord around how our body changes, right? Boys change too, but boys don't get the breasts, right? Boys don't get they get the testicle enlargement, but for girls, they're now getting pubic hair, they're now getting breasts. And we, again, are shaming that. So tap into why you have brought this into your narrative as a parent, tap into how it made you feel, and then tell yourself, do I want this value for my child? Do I want this to be how my child is raised? Or do I want to change that cycle and really introduce a new way? And we are always capable of change. We are always capable of breaking that generational cycle. And I really encourage that on my platforms. I'm I get that this is uncomfortable, but you have to tap into why it's uncomfortable for you so that we can actually make a change for our kids. And I grew up in a house where we didn't talk about sex. We didn't talk about any of these anatomical body parts, but I changed because of my career, right? Because of what I know for not only sexual assault, but also just body autonomy in general that isn't related to sexual assault, but getting out of my space, right? If someone's closing in on you and it feels uncomfortable, hey, I'm going to move my body away because this doesn't feel good to me. I want my kid to feel that he can protect himself in any situation, whether it's sexual, whether it's not, because that's safety and that's trust. And I think that's such a beautiful thing that we have to start with to break that cycle for anyone who's having difficulty.
Yeah. And you mentioned breaking the cycle and breaking out of that sort of pattern of stigmatizing different body parts. Where was that intervention for you, if you know? Was there a specific class, course, event, or article or person that made you choose that direction?
I love it. And a lot of it was just my understanding of seeing my sexual assault victims in my office and seeing the kids so I'd see older children, but I'd also see sexual abuse in younger kids, right? And the way they would communicate those words. And I think, Katie, you had mentioned like they would use these terms and we're now trying to dig and figure out the story when they're not using the proper anatomy. And I was like, what is going on here? So this was in training, right? So let's just time it like when I was in residency. Me and the attendings are trying to figure out, is this a sexual assault? Is this something that we need to call in? Is this something that they're just saying a story? And it was very confusing for us. And through that training and the mentors that I had is when I started realizing the importance of the names. And it just stuck with me. And then, as I started to practice, it just really snowballed into this sort of thing that made sense for everybody. And like, again, I know we are talking about sexual assault versus not, but it all matters, right? I mean, again, for body safety, body autonomy, it's so much more than just, I'm trying to protect my kid against sexual assault. I'm just trying to give my kid the confidence in knowing that their body is their body. And then in turn, other people's bodies are their bodies, right? Like we don't invade their privacy. We don't pull down people's pants. We don't do any of these things that would make them feel uncomfortable, and that is so important to remember.
I think that's so key what you said too about my body is my body, but also other people's bodies are their bodies. I think so often people think about the work that like organizations like ours do as, we're coming at boys saying, well, you're bad, inherently bad. And of course that's not true. And of course, 1 in 6 boys are also likely before the age of 18 to be sexually assaulted. And women are capable of sexually assaulting as well. But I think it's so important to introduce that sort of language to kids at a young age without that shame of, well, you've done something bad.
One story I have, which I think is a personal one, but I think it's really important. And it really drives home this example. My son is 5.5, and I'm going to be sharing this on my newsletter, so I'm happy to share. He was at summer camp and 2 kids were upset at him. One of them pinned him down and the other one tried to take down his pants. It was a horrifying situation that I heard from the school. And obviously as a mom and someone who's very into this sort of body autonomy, I felt for my son, like he must have been so scared, like that must have been very uncomfortable because we teach him about protecting self and, that's not something that you should do. He came home and he was perfectly fine. We got it out of him, the story. And, there was no, from the being on that side of being the bullied child, right? That's a form of bullying. I talked to him about it and I said, hey, Ryan, how did that situation make you feel? He's like, Mommy, I didn't like it. I don't like when people pin me down. And I say, yeah. And I'm like, so what, next time if that happens, I want you to protect your body. What I don't want to teach children is to pin someone else down and punch them or, pin them down and take down their pants. This is not a tit for tat parenting situation. It's, I need you to protect your body, push them off, and then I need you to go get help, right? From a grown-up. And that's what I told him. I'm like, if that happens again, you are going to protect your body. If that means kicking, if that means putting your hands up, and then you're going to get out of that situation and then go get help. And then the other aspect, which was a teaching moment, was, Ryan, I know that happened to you and I know we don't do that, but I want to remind you, do we ever pin somebody down and do we ever try to take down somebody else's pants? And he's like, no, Mommy. I'm like, even if other children are doing it, that's not something we do in our home or to anyone that we know in our school or anybody, right? And it was a really healthy teaching point, a very hard moment for me as a mom, to see and feel like my son's pain of having been in that vulnerable position. But to me, me and my husband talked, I'm like, this will happen eventually, right? Whether he's a teenager or whatever, that he may be the perpetrator, he may be the victim of this kind of stuff, but I need to nip this in the bud and really make sure and drive home that this is not the values that we are doing in our home, that we can figure out disagreements and we can do things without pinning down and obviously without pulling down a child's pants, even if it's funny, right? These are kindergartners that were joking. I'm like, this isn't funny to me. Like, this is something that is a private area and that is not something we do. And it was a really good conversation that we had. And it really drives home that point of teaching your child about body safety, protecting their body, not recreating the cycle of, pinning other child down and doing that to them. I'm not raising kids like that, but how do we protect our kids and also fight for their autonomy, but also know how to get help and ask for help. And I said, I'm like, if anybody does that this week, if anyone touches your body or does anything that you feel is unkind, you need to tell the teacher, but you also need to tell me. And going back to the first message, it starts at home. It starts at saying to your child that I'm your safe space, but showing them that you're their safe space, with how you communicate all these little things, right? When they say no to you or about their body, or when they say no to grandma, they know then that you are their safe space and that you're not against them, that you are on their team, and they're more likely to report things to you. And again, adding the anatomical body parts would have helped if any of his classmates tried to touch anything like that, right? I would have said, wow, like we need to get some help and talk about this. And it's so empowering to teach my 5.5-year-old that and see it work, like see it in his eyes and his registering brain of like, yeah, mom, like, no, I don't like that. I'm not doing that. That's not kind. And I'm like, yes, here's good raising right here. And I'm so proud of my husband and I for doing that. And that's just an example that I think every parent's capable of.
I had a similar situation with my 8-year-old. He just turned 8. So in second grade, he was 7. And there was an issue with a boy who kept grabbing his, bum and just doing things that were inappropriate. And it got to a point where we needed to talk to the school about it. And it was interesting because a lot of times the school wanted to just talk with us and didn't want to include my son in it. And my husband and I kept having to bring our son back into it because we said, this happened to him. This is his experience. We need him to be able to share how he felt. And again, it's giving them that agency and letting them be a part of it. I think is so important to say, how did that make you feel? And, also talking about if this happens again, you have the right to protect yourself. And as soon as you're, safe, then go to speak to an adult. Another thing that's been really interesting for me as I'm now navigating the school years is, before my son went to school, my daughter is not yet in school. She goes to preschool. But, it was really interesting to me that as soon as he got into kindergarten, all of a sudden there are these messages of what it means to be a girl or what it means to be a boy. All of the things that I really avoided, the first 5 years of his life before he went into school, it was really pushed onto him. I don't like pink anymore. I don't like purple anymore. This like toughness that I had to constantly explain and talk to him about and push back on him, and I spoke with you about the programming that we do sort of around aspirational masculinity and humanity and breaking down these gender norms when they really can become unhelpful and actually harmful. And so I just wanted to kind of get your input on that and how you see it show up in your exam room and just how you help your patients and parents navigate that and any of sort of the negative impact it can have as they get older.
You're right on that. I think most parents, if they don't know, around the age of 5 is when, like, again, starting that pre-K kindergarten is when you're going to start to see that sort of gender norms start to fit into their brain. And my kid was also a kid who loved unicorns, purple and pink, or certain things that were deemed more girly. I'm putting that in quotes. And then he's like, no, mommy, that's for girls. Boys don't do that. Or boys are stronger. Girls are this. And I'm like, it's hard because that's not stuff that we say, like you said perfectly. And then so I know he's getting that from school and from his peers because the teachers aren't saying that. I know that because I know these teachers. And so it can be really hard. And I think the first thing is reaffirming your value system at home, right? Like, what is it that you believe? Like, if he comes home, your son comes home, or even daughter, and is like, girls are supposed to do this and boys are supposed to do this. Oh, really? Who said, oh, I'm curious, who said that to you? Oh, Or maybe they won't say anything. Oh, that mommy likes to do X, Y, and Z, and daddy likes to do X, Y, and Z. Like, reiterating the fact that we don't do, that there's many things that are not aligned to just being a boy or a girl, right, is so healthy. And I see this in my office. I see it from coming down from the parents often. There is a lot of gender norm bias from parents. It's there. I can't deny it. I don't think it's getting any better, to be quite honest. I think our generation is doing a better job than generations past, but I see it more with boys, right? Like, I see boys being raised in this culture of toughness, in this culture of limited emotional expression. You got to toughen up. You can't cry. You're a little girl. You're doing this like a girl, which is obviously so offensive to girls. And that really has that negative impact, right? And so, yeah, I believe that there's so much of that happening. I believe that it's permeating into making these boys feel like they can't be humans, right? Like, rather than just being boy, girl, like when you say that boys can't cry or boys have to be a certain way, you're not allowing them to have just general interests, right? Like from a fear of what? A fear of them looking too feminine, a fear of them being too nurturing, a fear of them. I mean, all the things that are feminine are actually very admirable, right? Like, it's like, what are we afraid of here? Like, and a lot of my parents in my office come from very big cultures that are very machismo, right? Like this, like male dominated cultures, like Latin, Indian, these are cultures that the male is the breadwinner, the woman is subservient, like very much culturally. And so breaking that requires me to reiterate those things in office that, hey, I like race cars, like, and almost like breaking the stereotype, or you like princesses? Who's your favorite princess? Like, and really just saying that that's super cool, and hearing a grown up say that, if they're not hearing it at home or if they're not hearing it elsewhere, reaffirms that, yeah, I could have interests that go outside the gender norms, or maybe I want to wear a purple shirt. It's so silly that we've aligned colors with certain sexes, right? Like my son loves purple. And I'm like, the day he tells me that he doesn't want to wear purple anymore, I'm going to be like, oh, like his favorite shirt is this purple unicorn shirt. And I'm like, you go, boy, you wear your purple unicorn shirt. And it's a reality, but it starts at home and how you're going to approach those conversations.
I had the same experience. So my son, when he was in preschool, he had a purple cape. He loved this purple cape. He wore it all the time, to the point that he was actually gifted the purple cape that was at preschool when he graduated preschool, because he loved it so much. And recently he told me, I don't like purple. And I sat down with him and I said, you used to love purple. Why don't you love purple? And I talked to him about the silliness of why are certain colors for different people, and how that thought process is actually used also to limit what people can do and what people can dream to do, and how it's been used in the past. Because now he's starting to get older, right? So I can explain to him, mommy went to law school. There was a time when girls weren't allowed to go to law school. And yeah, it's different with colors, but as that same belief builds, that's where it builds into. And so I had this whole conversation. When you have these conversations with your kids, you're like, is this actually hitting? Or are they actually grasping anything I'm saying? But you know what? The day after, he came up out of our basement wearing that purple cape. And it was one of those moments where I was like, okay, all right, something I said worked. But yeah, it's something you have to constantly have those conversations about.
Yeah, and I think that's going back to the safe home, right? I mean, I cannot stress that is the purpose of being a parent. Like I don't shame a lot of parents. I don't, but when I go back to these philosophies and these values, like you got to think about what it is that you want and make sure that you are instilling that at home. If you want a child who's raised understanding that purple is for everybody and that, we can have interests that are crossing gender lines, that is the value you're going to reiterate. And they will come around on their own accord, like that example, right? Like he may have been like, I don't want to wear purple, but then now that he has it in his brain that, oh yeah, my safe space, my mommy and my daddy were okay with that. If he sees that purple cape, he'll be like, I'm still loved. Like the people that matter love me, and they will love me if I wear purple or not. And, this whole fitting in school and like I know a lot of them get teased for, doing these things. I'm like, can we all just take a parenting pact and just raise our kids to be loving and not really care about colors? Like, please. or characters, my daughter loves unicorns, but she also loves dinosaurs, like obsessed with dinosaurs, which tend to be a more masculine active, like toy. And I'm like, I love it. She wears dino PJs all day. She loves these. And then she loves her unicorns. So crossing those gender norms, like I love it. I love that both the kids are like that. And I hope that they always know that they can have interests outside of their stereotypes.
Yeah. And let's be real. Like as you get old, there's constantly going to be people's opinions of how you should be, who you should be, what you like, what you wear, how you should look. And if we can start young to teach our kids, like, try not to listen to those pressures and try to listen to who you are. And we're all different. And I remember when he was younger, and I say it now to my daughter, if all of the flowers in a garden were the same color, like a garden wouldn't be as fun, right? Like we want all the different colors and all the different shapes and varieties. That's what makes it beautiful. And so you don't need to be the same as everybody else. Actually, like being different is really cool and really beautiful. And I think it's not a lot of the things, that's a lot of the adults in our lives probably didn't hear that when they were younger. And so just really pushing back and challenging that. And it's sort of like an everyday thing that we have to kind of keep reinforcing.
Yeah, and I love what you had to say too about it starting at home and starting in your safe spaces. I think I'd love to think that the modus operandi of a family or even of an individual, once they become aware of it, is to expand your safe space, not just from the home. But I feel like our goals should be expanding our safe spaces, and not just, being physically safe from outside forces that we have no control over, but just knowing yourself, knowing your boundaries, and knowing or being secure in the choices that you make for yourself, and knowing that you've made those choices free of coercion. And so a lot of what we talk about at I Have the Right To, especially with my dad, who has been a great advocate since the very beginning of my journey as a survivor, and even beforehand, he's been a great example of what an aspirational man should look like. And not really with the help of us. He's a very emotional guy, and he, anytime a Bruno Mars song plays, he cries. And we would laugh and make fun of him for it. And as we started learning more and more about, how to create a consent culture, and that it does include letting men be the full spectrum of a human being, that now we have to stop ourselves when we're like, oh, dad's going to cry when the song comes on. No, it's so beautiful that he has access to these emotions. So what age do you sort of see that sort of shutdown of full humanity showing? And then where are instances that you can see that like there's room for people to come in and sort of say, hold on a second, I notice you're being stifled or put into a box, besides colors and, toys and movies and interests. I feel like there are a lot of emotional and mental, blocks and boxes that young children are put into too.
Yeah, and I think it starts, like we mentioned, in early toddlerhood, right? Because those are the moments where they're going to start now having those meltdowns. So even as young as 1 year of age, right? When we say, you're giving your 1-year-old boy or girl a little bit of understanding, but as they get into that 2, 3, it can be like, okay, toughen up. Like, why are you crying? And I think the biggest time that I see it is when the parent's expectation doesn't match the reality. So parents expect 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds to be these emotionally mature children, but they're still underdeveloped in terms of their limbic system and their emotional regulation, right? So then it becomes this 4, 5-year-old that's now going out into the world, like let's say, kindergarten, and they're having these meltdowns, they're having these emotions. And that to me is this key time where a lot of parents can start to, don't cry. Why are you crying? Even if they didn't do that for toddlers, right? Even if that was all of a sudden it's a 180, because there's this expectation I see a lot of the times that we expect more of our 4-year-old and 5-year-old when why? Like they are still struggling. Should they be having tantrums to the frequency as a 1-year-old or 2-year-old? No, but they still can have desires and frustrations show up as meltdowns, right? Like crying, being upset. And a lot of that teaching comes from doing the similar things that you did when they were toddlers, right? I see you're upset, holding your boundary if there's a boundary, right? I see you're upset. We're not watching that right now, but I'm upset. I would be upset too. I get it. We can work on something else right now, right? Like really going through that quick validation, reaffirming the boundary, and transitioning at every age, especially in that 5-year-old age where it can be easy to be like, just stop, like you're such a baby, right? And that is how I think we have to remember, because when you start having that expectation reality mismatch, you can start to say and do things as parents because you just feel ashamed. You feel like, well, if he's crying in kindergarten, people are not going to, play with him or stuff like that. But every kid is unique here, right? Every kid. And I love that your father's a sensitive person. Like, a lot of men, I do believe, are sensitive, but they were stifled at some point in their life, right? Someone told them that they can't be sensitive, that they had to shut it down. And those men, unfortunately, turn out to be men, or even, let's say, a woman who's the same way, that bottle it in, end up using other coping mechanisms, right? If you can't feel it, you can't heal it, right? If you can't feel the feeling and feel frustration, feel anger, and have someone say, you're frustrated, you're angry, we can never teach that person a coping skill for that feeling, right? And I think a lot of men, and I see this, a lot of men turn into rage, a lot of men turn into drinking, drug use, because they were told that they can't feel. So now what happens? They never learn the coping skill, and they're looking now for an external way, or sexual addiction and control, right? They're trying to find ways because society has told them for far too long, you can't feel. You can't feel, you can't feel. And that's going to come out somewhere in their behavior. That's why it's so important that we allow men to feel at little young ages. We allow boys. Same thing goes for young girls. The stereotype for young girls is that they have to be obedient. They have to listen. My little girl is a firecracker. I mean, she is like, no one can mess around with her. She like climbs over her brother, and we let her. We let her because it's good for them to learn, but also like, obviously if there's a boundary or something that we need to set, but I celebrate her for being assertive. I celebrate my son for being assertive. And it goes down to celebrating characteristics in your child, whether they are a boy or a girl. So I'm celebrating the fact that my son is very emotionally intelligent, that he can tell me, Mommy, I feel sad. It makes me feel like I'm doing what I wanted to do all along. Same thing with my daughter. I'm not looking at them differently because they are a boy and a girl. And I think that comes down to, if you are raising a boy, girl combination, whatever it is, that you remember to take those expectations out of the societal gender norms of what is expected of them, because that way you can actually be the parent to the child that you would do if that was a girl, right? Like, many people don't say stop crying to a girl, because we're more nurturing of women, because we're like, oh, they're so sensitive. But that same level of respect should be given to boys, right? That, yeah, you're upset, but we don't do that because of society.
Yeah, and that level of respect for sadness should also be given to anger, I feel like, for women as well.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a lot of the times not allowed.
No, I mean, anger. And I mean, my son is like me. I used to have really bad anger issues. And it was because I grew up in a home where I wasn't allowed to be angry. I was slapped across the face, or I was put in a timeout. My son has inherited my anger, fiery, energy. And I'm channeling it, and I teach him about anger, and I say, you got really upset, and Mommy gets really upset too. And I sometimes want to stomp my feet. And you know what I do? I just hug this pillow really tight, or I give Mommy a big hug. And it's teaching him to say to me, I'm feeling angry. What am I going to do with this feeling, rather than punch a wall, rather than punch a person, rather than take it out on something or someone else, which unfortunately we see in society happens far too much with children as they grow up and never got this emotional intelligence.
Exactly. And the importance too, I love the work that Chessy's dad, Alex, does in our org with the, high school students, the high school male students and beyond. And I think it goes to show how important it is to have men and boys in these conversations too. And especially with our young ones, right? For them to see mommy or aunts or grandmas or whoever encouraging them to be emotionally open, but also the dads and the uncles and the grandfathers, because then they realize, okay, it's not just the women in my life that are going to caretake for me and help me access my emotions, but also the men, so that they can see themselves in those role models as well. And it's one of the reasons why we try to bring everybody into these conversations. And what's interesting is when we go into high schools and we have these conversations, the boys are so eager to hear about it. They want people to encourage them to have this full access to their emotions, right? Like they want that opportunity and not to be sort of limited to, whatever they're saying in the manosphere of what a man should be, but really having so many wider emotions available to them. And so it's just, it needs to be everybody brought in and having these conversations with them. So one thing you had mentioned earlier during our conversation about responding to potential patients that have dealt with sexual abuse. And I remember reading an article a while ago. It was a therapist, I think. Chessy, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but it was a therapist that was looking at Chessy's case and talked about why maybe Chessy had more positive outcomes, like is doing better than what a lot of survivors do. And they analyzed that because her sister's first reaction was, it wasn't your fault. And her parents immediately believed her and stood up for her and joined her in that journey towards what justice and healing would look like for her. So what is some advice that you could give to parents that are navigating that, right? Like their child disclosed to them, or there's something challenging going on, ways that parents can respond and be there for their kids, or even maybe some things that you've seen of things that parents have done well and not so well, and then the outcomes that those kids eventually have.
I love that. And it goes down to believing your kid, right? And again, that has to happen when there's trust, right? And that foundation is so important to me, because you have to have that foundation so that they can learn to confide in you on when things are not going so well for them, right? And this is a prime example of a situation that was very hard and very scary. And that child, Chessy, we were in a very vulnerable position. So kids are not going to share their most vulnerable feelings, their most vulnerable situations, if they don't have a safe caretaker or safe home, right? And that is, to me, the biggest thing that we can do for our child, is give them that safe foundation. And it's the foundation of secure attachment, right? Secure attachment is there's security that when you go out into the world, you feel secure that if anything goes on, I have this safe space at home. I won't feel judged. And so it goes down to listening, asking how the child feels or person feels, if it's an adolescent, like how are you feeling, right? Rather than let's do this, like first, how are you feeling? What's going on right now? And that's what I did with my son with he's 5.5. I didn't say, Ryan, tell me what happened. I started with, hey, how is there anything, how did you feel today? Like we gotta connect through the feeling first. Connect through the feeling, believe them, and talk with them about where they are with these emotions or with the situation, right? And then going through what avenues that looks like, right? I know we want to be in this mama bear mode sometimes of like, I'm going to get this, this little person. And although that fire is really important to like want to get justice for our kids, and don't get me wrong, I think it's really important. When a kid is vulnerable, it's all about the kid, right? Like not like about the perpetrator. It's about, what are we going to do to make this better for you? And what do we need to do to make you feel safer and also get the justice that you deserve of what happened here, right? And keep you safe in the future at a school system if it was someone who was at a school, right? So that really comes down, I think, to those few things: believing them, validating, asking the questions. And I see that in my office, when I have these situations, sadly, a lot of my situations that I've seen have been sexual abuse or abuse from a family where the parents are separated. So one of the parents was the perpetrator. And then, obviously that's happening. And that gets really messy because it's he said, she said, all of that stuff. My job as the physician will always be documenting, narrating. I can't take sides in that situation. As a parent, of course, it is a side, right? Like you should be taking the kid's side and saying, hey, we're going to figure this out together. You are not alone, because imagine how vulnerable they must have felt, right? And so if we start blaming that child, like, well, what did you do? Like, what did you wear? What did you say? I don't want any of that. Let's talk about you and how I can rebuild safety in your life, like in your being that now has felt so vulnerable because someone assaulted you. I need to rebuild that with you. And we are a team. And I think that team approach to parenting, especially all ages, but especially that pre-adolescence to adolescence, can mean less children not coming back to their parents for major issues. It really builds this really strong sense of trust for everybody.
That's really amazing to hear. I think it's so helpful for people to get more acquainted with the tangible ways that they can respond, or practical ways that they can respond to a child or anybody disclosing. And yeah, I do thank my sister and my friends too, who saw me immediately afterwards all the time for responding as they did. And some of those responses shifted over time, but my sister and I talk all the time about how important it is to put that power and control also back in the survivor's hands. And it's a little complicated when it comes to, or it feels complicated when it comes to putting that power and control back in the hands of a child who's experiencing harm. But the way that you put it, in that phrasing of questions, of making sure to prioritize their feelings first, feels like the correct way to put that sort of power, like even the power of telling their own story, of sharing their own story, back in their hands. So thank you so much for sharing, all of these practical pieces of advice. And one last thing that I'd love to ask you, or one out of two last things that I'd love to ask you, is what would you, if you could give one piece of advice to parents or caregivers on raising a kid who's really confident in their boundaries, in their respect for themselves, what would that be?
Like to raise a child like that?
Yeah.
Like how, yeah. So my biggest way to raise a child with confidence in self is security in the household and security with you. It goes back to that secure attachment piece that children and human beings, they need to have a safe space, right? I believe in something called lighthouse parenting, which is like this, our goal in life is to be that safe beacon that brings our kids home when they need safety, right? I don't need to micromanage you. I don't need to be like, how are you feeling? What are you doing? Are you okay? That's not what we're asking here. We are asking for these micro and macro moments built in from the time that they're born, that they know that they can trust you, that there's communication around their bodies, around their feelings. And this includes meal times. This includes, when they go to the park. Like, we forget that there's so many moments that we're teaching kids about their body. Illnesses, like when my kid is sick and he doesn't want to take his, he loves taking meds, but when he, is not feeling good, I talk to him about the importance of rest and eating well and water, right? I want them to understand not just about body autonomy, but about their body, right? That their body is theirs and it's this beautiful thing, and that I am there to help them along the way, I think is how you can raise these body confident kids. And side note, this is actually the concept of one of my books I'm writing about raising body confident children. And it doesn't mean just the body confident, like I love my body. It's everything that goes with it. It's body, mind, and spirit, right? I love my feelings. I'm angry, but I know how to channel them. I know my body signals when I'm full, right? All of that connects here into, I know when I'm sleepy. I know when I need a nap. I know when I need rest. I know when I need to take a break. These are all things that I think as adults we forget, but if we can raise our children with that, they will feel more confident in themselves and then more confident in coming to you when they need help, because they will. Whether they're 5 or 25, the goal is to never not need their parent, but to need them in different ways.
I've never heard of lighthouse parenting before, and that is such a beautiful concept and way of thinking about it, because I think that that's everybody's goal, right? Like if my kid, whether they're 8, 18, 28, 38, to know that I'm always there for them and to feel like I can be the person that they pick up the phone and call first. So that's just beautiful. And I can't wait to read your book. That's so exciting that you're working on a book. Is it a kid's book, a parenting book?
It's a parent. It's meant for parents. And yes, it's talking about basically healthy children, but beyond just, when I think people hear a pediatrician writing about health, they think physical health, but it's so much more than that. It's like I said, it's the emotional body, like loving our bodies. Like, how do we teach our kids to respect and love their bodies, not just from emotional health, but from physical health? So all the different chapters talk about, healthy relationship with sleep, healthy relationship with food, body image, self-worth, and all of that, and why that combination is so important for children to learn.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I can't wait to read it. Is it a next year thing? Probably, or when can people...
probably 2020, it's 2027. I'm in the proposal phase right now. And so that,
oh my gosh, I can't wait.
Yeah. And so I'm writing my intro and all of that and getting all that together and the chapters and the outline. And then hopefully we'll get a publishing house to accept it. And then I'll get to writing the full book. But I love the idea. Obviously, it's something that I've been wanting to write for so long, and finally just makes sense. And in a world where people are always looking at, supplements and cleanses and this and that, I'm like, a lot of this information that we just talked about is coming down to connection, communication, and you don't need to buy anything to be a good parent, right? It's really coming down to how are we showing up and how are we using our words to give our children worth in their life and they're with themselves. And I think that's such a big and powerful thing that we can do as parents.
Yeah, well, I will definitely be purchasing that.
Yeah, so I'll have to come back on.
I can't wait to read it.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. I would love that.
Yeah.
So what we've started recently doing is asking our guest what they have the right to. So sort of finishing the name of our org. When we go into schools, we have students write, I have the right to, and then they fill out whatever it is that they want people to know that they have the right to. So what would your statement, your I have the right to statement be, either for yourself or for the young people that you work with, the youngest ones or the teens? How would you finish that sentence?
Ooh, I love this. I would say, based on what we've talked about, I would say I have the right to love my body. I have the right to love myself, even when I'm flawed. And I have the right to ask for help when I need it, would be my big one.
Oh, I love that so much.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to hear that. And I really can't wait to read your book. That sounds incredible. Yeah. A lot of my friends and I have started to move home after living independently for a bit. And so it's been really interesting to watch, family dynamics shift, coming from an independent adult back to being in a childlike environment. So hearing, the way that parents can encourage their kids to, not just from the kid-child stage, but even as adults, to continue practicing self-love and loving their bodies and trusting their bodies and themselves, I think is such a powerful message. Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. This is so great. And I love being able to really spread this message. It's such an important one. And I think, as we talked about, it really transcends just about every aspect of teaching our kids about themselves, right? And I think that's our duty as grownups in our children's life, to be able to share that. And so I'm really glad to spread that message here with you today.
Awesome. And Dr. Mona, thank you so much for being here with us today. Your work reminds us that building a safer world for kids doesn't just happen in courtrooms or classrooms. It starts in everyday moments, in pediatric offices, dinner tables, and bedtime stories.
Exactly. What you've shared today reinforces something we believe deeply at I Have the Right To, that body autonomy, respect, and emotional safety aren't lessons you save for later. They're foundations you start building from day one.
And before we wrap up, can you share with our listeners how is the best way to follow your work, to keep up to date with what you're doing?
Wonderful. My Instagram account is The Hub, as well as my website, Peds Doc Talk, PEDSDOCTALK, on Instagram and TikTok. And then I also have a YouTube channel. And then the website is pedsdoctalk.com. And then my podcast is a top parenting podcast, where I don't just share things about this, but also child health development, but in my opinion, just really overlaps in so many different ways. So please stay connected. I have so much more coming for the world, and I love to stay connected with all of the new friends that I make through going on other people's shows.
I've been a follower for a long time, and I encourage everyone to follow you as well. Again, thank you for your voice. And to all of you listening, thank you for showing up with us. Keep asking questions, keep having these conversations, and remember, you have the right to. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening. Like and subscribe to the podcast on all platforms. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends about Aspire. Follow us on social media at I Have the Right To. Learn more about our student and executive programming at our website at ihavetherightto.org.